Sometimes when you're ready.
Welcome everyone to the June briefing session. It being the allotted time, or a little bit past the allotted time, 3 minutes past 6, I'll declare this meeting open. As you may know, the briefing session occurs a week in advance of the Ordinary Council meeting. This briefing session is not a decision-making forum, but rather an opportunity for councillors to ask questions and seek further clarification on items listed in the agenda. Kaya Marman, Kaya Yoga, Kaya Bridie, Yananuk, Nalak Karij, Winji Alaknini, Nalak Karij, Nidja Buja Bal, Wajak Nunga, Buja Lalaknini, Kura, Nijie Burawan. And so on behalf of the town of Bassendean, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land on which we meet, the Wajak people of the Noongar Nation. May their campfires burn forever. I would also like to remind people that our meetings are recorded and uploaded to the town's website and also live streamed. Acknowledge a visitor to the chamber, the president of the local RSL. I'd like to ask councillors, we have one apology this evening, which is Councillor McWilliam, and I don't believe we have any other. Oh, we have Mr. Paul White is also an apology this evening, and Libby Kenya is an apology. Now, declarations of interest. So, Councillor Carter, yes, you'd like to declare an interest. I believe it's 8.6, isn't it?
That's right. I declare an interest in item 8.6, the Bassendean Hotel. My interest is that, it's a tenuous interest, because the application has been submitted by the art group, who has commissioned me to undertake research into the newly purchased Mount Hawthorn Hotel. So I'm not sure whether that's considered, but I do have a pecuniary relationship with the art group.
I believe from our discussion this afternoon that you will be leaving the chamber for that discussion. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I will.
Right. And I also have a declaration of interest on item 8.9, which is the whole Hamilton Street site. It is a speculative interest, and I also will be leaving the chamber and not participating in discussion on that item. This is a speculative interest in that I expressed some interest in potentially maybe buying land if it became available, but there's a whole host of circumstances around that, which is why it's called a speculative interest, may or may not happen. So in those circumstances, I will leave the chamber and allow the Deputy Mayor to preside over that item. Petitions, I don't believe there are any. Okay. I did have one very short announcement. Sorry, I skipped over that. It's just a short little announcement to indicate that the town has been successful in securing a grant to acknowledge the Queen's Jubilee, and this is going to be acknowledged with planting of an avenue of trees at Jubilee Reserve, Eden Hill. So quite pleased about that. I believe a plaque will go up first, followed by planting in subsequent winter seasons. We now move on to question time and statements, and I don't believe any questions have been sent through or statements. And this deputation? Okay, so Andrew Robertson from RSL, you wanted to do a deputation tonight to the...
Yeah, just a quick spiel on where we are and what we're hoping to do.
You can, by all means, move up to the table if you like.
No, I'll stand here. No, perfectly fine. No, there's way too much power over there.
Come and join it.
There's a spare seat right here.
We've got a spare chair up the top here.
No. As you've been told, my name's Andrew Robson. I'm the President of the Eastern Regional RSL. We've been trying to express to our interest in the block next to ours that we've been carefully maintaining for the, well, I wouldn't like to guess how many years that we've been watering the lawn there and looking after the garden. But we're definitely in the mind to do something more grandiose with that piece of land. Not only for the betterment of the city of, the town of Bassendean, but also for the betterment of our veterans. The Eastern Regional RSL, if you're not aware, is one of the fastest growing RSLs in Western Australia. It is consistently in the top 3 growing RSLs, and predominantly we cater and tend to ex-servicemen to the mindset of nothing else. We don't really cater to a civilian contingent, so to speak. And subsequently, and it was just brought to my attention the other day, that the Eastern Regional Bassendean RSL is well known nationwide about the way that we perform and the way that we conduct ourselves in bringing services and a veteran-friendly environment to those soldiers who are struggling, especially some of our younger veterans, which is one of the main goals and focuses of RSL WA and national at the moment, because there has been a lot of animosity and loss of faith in how RSLs as a whole have sort of conducted themselves. I put this down to a big feather in our cap at the RSL around the corner. We definitely don't conform to most norms of RSLs. I know a number of you have been down there and seen sort of how we operate. We sort of like ask people to leave their attitudes at the door, and we try to just get on with the job. As you may or may not have noticed, we've sort of started developing the land already with Dave's help in the helicopter that we got built for us by a local Perth artist. The helicopter was handcrafted, and specifically just for that, we have gotten so much feedback about that helicopter, and are constantly getting people dropping in and coming to check it out every single day. We do have more plans for that helicopter, but that's more to come, and that's pretty much beholden on the fact that we are very, very keen to re-secure a peppercorn lease or some form of lease on that land, so that the RSL can progress in developing the land in the future, so that it becomes more aesthetically pleasing and more open and accessible to not only veterans but also to the greater Bassendean area. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, if you wouldn't mind, councillors may wish to ask questions. So, Councillor McLennan.
Oh, that's me.
Yep.
Thanks for coming here tonight, and thanks for everything that you're doing for veterans in our community. I know that a lot of the services that you do are really valued, not just by the people that are regularly part of the RSL, but by the broader community as well. So thank you for that. So 2 questions. First of all, you mentioned that you're keen to have a lease, and you said peppercorn. Just looking at the officer recommendation, which is for the $1,500 per annum, do you have any comments on that?
There have been lots of comments about that. A lot of the servicemen do seem to think that that's probably a little bit on the extreme side of where we want to be paying, purely and simply because we're not we are a charitable organisation. We don't do a lot of fundraising. However, there have been discussions about some negotiations with regards to if we pay that amount of money, if the council is willing to help us out with like water to the block, because there is no water on that block. We've been watering the lawn and maintaining the whole thing with pretty much without council support for at least while I've been president. I know Dave does snabble the local gardener if he's available to give the lawn a quick mow. But yeah, it's there has been discussion. I'm not overly against the idea of the $1,500. Yes, it works out to about $125 a week, which is still quite a bit of money for a month. Sorry, which is, you know, in comparison to what we make, it is still quite a substantial amount of money. But I'm willing to negotiate on that, as long as the council is willing to hopefully help us out with the care and maintenance of the paddock. There are greater plans afoot, and having water on the block would definitely make it a lot easier for us to be able to achieve that.
Well, that was my next question. You've mentioned greater plans a couple of times. Is that something that you're able to share with us?
Yeah, sure. So the ultimate goal for the area was to turn it into like a veterans walk. We wanted to develop garden beds and a walkway through there with the helicopter as the centerpiece, with different obviously native plants. We wanted to level the block a little bit up the top end near Old Guildford Road, put retaining in obviously, and put a small cenotaph there, so that if we need to do a small function or something like that, instead of having to hire out the or book out the BIC, we could just hold something really quick in the corner. The helicopter, obviously, we'd like to elevate the helicopter. We'd like to make the helicopter look like it's about to fly up Bassendean Road, Guildford Road, which would look absolutely fantastic. But obviously, that would require some structural work going and concrete in the ground. So getting the permissions for that, obviously, it's at the moment it's council land, and we'd have to put in proposals for that and obviously get funding and support for that. We'd like to, well, the plans are to looking to get grants to replace that fence that's between us and the vet, because it's falling apart and falling over, and people are breaking into the property all the time. So that's another thing that we want to do to develop. We want to fix the retaining. We want to get rid of that vine. We want to fix up the trees. You might have noticed we've got some fruit trees growing there on the proviso that when they do flower, the people can just help themselves. We also want to put down, get some guys doing a bit of research on local entities from Bassendean who have fallen in combat, and put like little markers around a garden, so that people can come to the garden, sit down there, and just get a little bit of Bassendean history, and hopefully make it a more aesthetically pleasing place than just a patch of grass.
Thank you.
Yep.
Councillor Carter.
Oh, thank you. Have you thought about purchasing this property?
My dream would be to be able to purchase the property, but there is no way in the next 50,000 years, given how much money we earn, that we would ever be able to purchase that land. Absolutely out of the scope, unless someone was to, some huge benefactor like Twiggy Forrester was to come and say, "Here you go." That's pretty much outside of our scope. Mainly, the provision is that our RSL belongs to RSL WA. It doesn't belong to the RSL Bassendean. And they're not in a position to do that sort of thing at the moment either. So obviously there's been some big changes at RSL WA, and negotiations are talking to them about RSL support, which is a big thing that they're pushing now, in redeveloping and reinvesting in sub-branches. And with our sub-branch growing the way that it is very rapidly starting to run out of space. Inside, not so much, but most veterans don't sit inside a building. They don't particularly like it, and that's why our outdoor area and that patch of grass is extremely popular. So, yes, I'd love to be able to say, yes, we'd love to buy that block of land, but I think the price would probably be well and truly outside of our scope of capability.
Can I ask another question?
Yes.
Thank you. You talked about the dividing the fence between
Yes.
you and the vets. If you were to get a low-cost lease or a typical lease, how would you fix that up, or would you be prepared to do all that work?
Well, our hope is to get a grant. Okay, so at the moment, the scope of works that we have, the plan of scope of works, obviously it's all on proviso that we get grants and are capable of doing that. But we're looking to extend the patio that's currently in position to the end of the disabled ramp. We would like to be able to secure a new office block and erect it where that tatty old green shed is, and move our advocacy into that building and destroy the old donga, for lack of a better word, which is dilapidated. It's older than most of us all put together, and turn that into where we can park the RSL's trailers and all our other, and put a shed there with wood for our fires and things like that. And the coffee shop would move into there as well, so we have a small coffee facility for the guys there. But yeah, and as part of that would be to replace the fence with a colour bond fence, preferably something that's quite high so that people can't jump over it. And yeah, just make it a little bit more than what it is now. That chain link fence is very, very dilapidated, and like last year I think we killed off most of the vine that was growing through it, which absolutely destroyed the fence. And that vine is still there. We're still endeavouring to peel it out of the fence. So that's the hope.
Okay. If you don't mind, I've got a couple of questions. You mentioned water.
Yep.
In the beginning. Given that water restrictions are becoming more prevalent, particularly for local governments, I don't know if you're aware that local governments, our access to water is consistently going to be reduced over coming years.
Yep.
They have restrictions on not only ratepayers but also local governments as well. Have you considered potentially other means of like water tanks or something like that?
We already have a water tank that's at the back of the building,
Yep.
which we are intending to plumb in to help irrigate the garden at this stage. However, we've been pulled up many times by the Water Corp for watering that lawn, because obviously we're not there. We don't have a reticulation system in place, and the guys generally only water the lawn when in the summertime and when someone's there, and that's usually during the day and outside the scope of when you should water, and someone will drive past and see a sprinkler on and then complain. So we do get quite a bit of grief from the Water Corp about watering the lawns when we water them. But that having been said, the plan would be to put in a fully reticulated system that would manage itself and utilise the plumbed water that we have. We have quite a big tank at the back that comes off the drains, and at the moment it's just constantly overflowing.
Okay. You mentioned the inability to potentially purchase that land in the future. Do you know if there are any substantial grants that might assist you in that respect in the future? And if not through your particular branch, through RSL main headquarters?
So RSL at the moment given what was discussed at Congress. Although on paper is financially okay, is not in a position to be lending big amounts of money. So they're not. Whereas to get to buy the land, most grants available to RSLs aren't for the purchase of land, it's for the development or the betterment, beautification. I can quite easily get grants for that sort of thing. The biggest grant that I'm aware of that I'm eligible for, which isn't available for me to buy land with, but is the DVA recognising veterans grant. I think that's anywhere up to about $150,000. So that's about, if DVA turned around and said yes, you can use that to buy that patch of land, that's as much money as we could be able to get out of one single grant. And triple dipping on grants is pretty frowned upon.
Okay.
Like I said, if we could, if this is, like I said, this is the first step of us trying to inspire something out of that piece of grass. Okay, it's not really doing much and has never really done much. The growth of the club is now so much that it's almost starting to outgrow me. I'm not required to be the impetus all the time. I have guys willing to step up and put the work in, not only in the building but also in the gardens and things like that. So they're there. They want to develop the land. They want to make it better for them. Who's to say in 2 or 3, 4 years time, when RSLWA is starting to earn some real money, and me and Duncan Anderson, our new president, are hand in hand and tight as thick as thieves. Maybe. I can't. I'll never say never. It would be ideal if we could. At this stage, we're just happy that RSLWA has agreed to no longer shut down sub-branches and actually invest money in developing them and bringing them back up to what they used to be.
Okay. And Councillor Plivka?
Yeah, thank you. You said that it's the Eastern Region RSL?
Our full title is the Eastern Regional Bassendean RSL. The main reason being is that we look after 3 regions. We look after this Bayswater, Bassendean and Guildford.
Okay, so you service all of those areas?
Yeah, and I deal with all 3 city councils and town councils. And
are there separate facilities in each of those others?
No.
Okay.
There used to be, then they were actually shut down by RSLWA, and we were merged into one, and then there was this big, this is years ago, big internal kerfuffle about monies and people and who was in charge, and it's taken a number of years. Up until about 6 years ago, that hall was empty and no one used it.
So City of Bayswater, City of Swan, Town of Bassendean are serviced by this particular RSL?
This RSL.
If the Town of Bassendean were minded to give you a...
No, just Guildford. We don't. The City of Swan has about 6 RSLs in their purview.
Oh, it's just the suburb of Guildford.
Just that we just look after the Gunners Park, basically. Yeah.
So those local governments, if we were minded to give you a peppercorn or a heavily discounted lease, would those other local governments be looking to contribute, perhaps by way of capital contributions?
No idea. As much support as we do get out of some of those city councils, it's not as much as we get out of the town of Bassendean. Mainly because the RSL is located here. If you come to dawn service, we conduct dawn service at Bayswater. We do the 9:30 show at Guildford, at Gunners Park, and then we do our main gig here at 11 o'clock. So we have to try and one day try and get across 3, and that's me dealing with 3 different city councils and all the drama. And
But I mean, if this lease were awarded to you on non-commercial terms, so a heavy discount, would that give you the leverage to speak to those other local governments and say, well, look what the town of Bassendean's done, what can you do to contribute?
oh, most definitely. I don't really have a lot of contact with them. They sort of speak to me maybe once or twice a year. But most definitely, shaking the tree is something that I'm pretty good at. So I would be in their face very much so.
I like the sound of that, and moving on to other things concerning trees. Just one personal interest more than anything. So when it comes to planting of trees, I understand that sometimes you plant species from war zones. So say Gallipoli, for example, you take a pine tree from that area. You mentioned native trees. Is that sort of something which still happens, that trees from areas of conflict would be planted for symbolic reasons?
There has been history of that. I believe there's some roses that you guys plant over here, which are exclusive. They're Gallipoli roses over here at the cenotaph, which no one will allowed to steal because they're a heritage. I just got told don't take them.
But essentially that's something that
keeping inside of obviously the law about what you can plant and what you can't plant. Predominantly, I would notice that most places just plant natives, and then they nominate a particular fallen veteran, or they nominate. That's probably what we would probably lean in favour of.
We're going to move off the planting at the moment, because unfortunately this item actually has nothing to do with gardens at the moment. What I will say is I've got a couple of other councillors who'd like to ask questions. If you don't mind, Councillor Clifford, I've got Councillor Wilding who'd like a question, and Councillor Carter who has one more question.
Yep.
So and also, okay, so
I'll wrap
one
up at the end.
more question each, and then we're going to wrap it up, okay?
Right.
Councillor Wilding, Carter and Ames.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you, Andrew, for your deputation as well. In a scenario where the RSL retained that $1,500 a year, so there was a peppercorn lease, what would that look like in terms of service provision for your members? What difference would that make on like a day-to-day sort of basis?
Well, we don't operate unfortunately, we don't operate on a daily basis. Well, not on a financial turnover basis.
Yeah.
Okay, so we do have someone there every single day doing advocacy, but really our only major source of income is either by donation or our turnover on a Friday night when we're open to sell in drinks. Yeah. As far as financial impact, I don't envisage it being a great impact on the RSL. There may be a need to increase pricing further down the road, obviously because all our other costs have gone up as everybody else's have. So it's probably going to be in the next 6 months that we're going to see exactly how much our costs are going to increase, and insurances and all that sort of thing. But at this stage, I don't envisage a great deal of financial risk. At this stage, no. The only concern was that it was only for 3 years. Most people would like it to be a little bit longer than that. That would give us a longer term goal. And, 3 years and then they could turn around and take it away is asking a lot for us to put here.
Okay, so Councillor Carter, and let's make them quick now.
I'll make it very quick. You alluded to this. This is a town of Bassendean property, Andrew, and part of our town master plan. Have you discussed with your management committee the effect if that piece of land was sold?
Well, we've discussed the sale of that land quite a lot actually, and how much disappointment there would be in the money that we've already contributed to keeping that piece of the fence, the signage, the helicopter, the shed, all the labour hours that we go in and mow the lawns and keep the gardens going, and purely just on a square meterage of available turf for people to sit outside and mingle. It has been a great asset to the RSL, and we'd like it to continue to be that way.
Okay, Councillor Ames.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thanks for coming in and having a chat with us this evening, Andrew. I've got two real quick questions. The first one is, you said membership is on the rise. What's your current membership, and what do you foresee your membership will be over the next sort of 12 to, say, 48, 36 months?
Okay, so the second question first is that's how long is a piece of string? Our membership at the moment is in excess of 120 members, full veterans on the books, given that 5 years ago we had 4. Okay, 98% of our membership are serving veterans or ex-serving veterans, of which we have about 2% socials, which are civilians who like to come to the RSL and have a drink. Of all the RSLs in the city, we are the only one that consistently recruits veterans on the majority. Ideally, how many people? I'd like them all. I'd like this to be the biggest RSL in Perth. Every member of our club wants that to be the biggest RSL in Perth.
And does that number look like 200 or 1,000?
Oh, I don't envisage us getting anywhere near 1,000. Some of the biggest, I think Port Kennedy's the biggest club, and they've got 1,000, but 80% of, 60% of their memberships are all social members. So, but they've got the Navy base right outside their door. And for a small RSL to be doing as well as we are doing speaks volumes to the attitudes and how we go about our business.
Right.
And as long as everyone walks in and walks out with a smile on their face and feels better about going there, even the mayor does that.
And my final question, which you alluded to very quickly, you said that the offer of a 3-year lease was a little bit too short for your liking. What would be your wish list of a length of lease? And obviously a peppercorn would be a wish list as well.
Oh, yeah.
What would there be move, or what sort of room to move would be? Are we talking like a 5-year or a 7-year?
I would be, like most people would be probably open to about a 5-year plan, keeping with the old communist plans, keep it within 5 years, with a grandfather clause in there that we can go back to back on that. Obviously on the behest of the town and the committee, if they're here and who's here and who's mayor and who's not. But yeah, I would really like to see it out to about 5 years. That gives us time to be able to plan, get money to do stuff. It's as you know, with grants are not always successful the first time. Sometimes you have to bash them about the same thing for a couple of years before you get anything done. And I'd hate for us to just get the grant and then the peppercorn is gone or the lease is gone, and then it's just give it all back.
Thanks very much, Andrew.
No problem.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Sorry for chewing up all your time.
No, that's okay.
All
Thank
right.
you very much. The first item that's on the agenda is actually this item anyway, so if you'd like to stay and listen to the questions, you're more than welcome. As I said, this is a question answering session. Councillors ask questions of the staff and the staff provide answers. So I'll open up the discussion first of all with the officer, if you would like to provide an overview to begin with, Mr. Gibson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As you can see, and as you're probably already aware, the report before Council tonight is to consider leasing the subject site to the RSL. The report provides for a 3-year lease term, which is in accordance with the council adopted land asset strategy, and the lease term aside, the other issue is clearly the lease premium. Again, the council adopted community leasing framework provides for an annual lease premium of $1,500 a year on the basis of it being a community rate as opposed to a commercial rate. As you know, the RSL have requested that council grant a peppercorn arrangement, and it's certainly open to council to do that. That would be a departure from the community leasing framework, but that's something that can be contemplated, as can a departure from the land asset strategy in terms of the lease term. But for the purpose of the report, staff have recommended that council resolve in accordance with both its adopted land asset strategy and its community leasing framework.
Councillor McLennan, followed by Councillor Ames.
Mr Gibson, I may not have completely accurate recollection, but I seem to remember a number of years ago there may have been some discussion from the WARSL around the site that they own, and about the potential for them to move at some stage in the future. Given that we've now got like our adopted town centre master plan and we'll soon have our new local planning scheme, and the value of both those pieces of land would expect to increase significantly because of the development potential, has there been any further communication from the WA branch about what their longer term intentions might be for those sites, or their site?
Through Madam Mayor, certainly not to me. I'm sort of anecdotally aware of those previous discussions, but my discussions with the RSL, principally through Mr Hughes, I think is a colleague of Mr Robertson's, there hasn't been as far as I understand it, no meaningful discussion between the various levels of the RSL regarding disposal or development of the sites.
Okay. And, sorry, can I just follow? And considering the town centre master plan and all those other things that we're working on, we've heard that the RSL Bassendean's preference would be for at least a 5-year term. From your professional perspective, have you got any advice for council on a 5-year term?
Through Madam Mayor, certainly open to council to pursue that. I suppose the 3-year term that was embedded into the land asset strategy, which council ultimately adopted, was to provide enough time for the new scheme to come into effect, on the basis that the town owns the site in fee simple. However, it's actually reserved as local open space under the scheme, but as you'll see from a different report on the same agenda, the proposal would be to ultimately rezone that site and many others to district centre. So the 3-year period would give council, would give the RSL a period of use while the scheme was running its course, but also provide council a future opportunity in the not too distant future to reconsider its options at that time. That's not to say the council would be obliged to develop or dispose of the site, but it would give council the opportunity in a reasonably short period of time to revisit the matter.
Thank you.
Councillor Ames.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you to Mr Gibson. The reason why this agenda item is on our agenda tonight is for what particular reason? I know that there's been some previous leases within the area, and then we've got some adopted town centre master plan and the land asset strategy. Why are we speaking about this now? Is there a current lease in there at the moment? Obviously, there's not much of what we're speaking about it, but why has it sort of taken so long from 14 to now 2022 to discuss this?
Through Madam Mayor, it's come to council because effectively the request of the RSL, on the basis that the RSL has requested a peppercorn lease, there is delegation to the CEO to approve leases where they accord with the community leasing framework. So had the RSL wanted to just proceed with the $1,500 a year in the 3-year period, that would have been in accordance with all the frameworks, and the CEO could have signed that off. But the RSL has demonstrated an interest in having council consider its request, and in terms of procedural fairness, that's brought to council for determination.
Thank you, Mr Gibson.
Councillor Wilding and then Councillor Polifka.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr Gibson, noting that the RSL hasn't proposed any plans to sell it. In the event that we hypothetically gave a 5-year lease and then the RSL chose to sell their block of land within 2 years, is there any opportunity to put a clause in there to wind up that lease early so we don't end up with a weird mismatch where there's a leased out block but then the other block's a different purpose?
Through you, Madam Mayor, certainly could. We could tie, there could be a sort of termination clause if the budding site was sold.
Councillor Plifka.
Something different, Mr. Adams. The site in question doesn't have water connected. What would it cost roughly for us to get a water connection there?
They are a bit expensive.
Talking on the order of 4,500 that we might collect over 3 years.
Something like that, maybe 5 to 10. That's with a water connection to the mains.
Yes.
I don't think we would have an opportunity to. I don't think we would have any reticulation in that area or our own reticulation. So it'd be in the order of about just over $5,000.
Yes, just to the lot boundary, and then the tenant can take it from there. So about 5,000, you think could possibly?
I think so, depending on the length of the run, where the water is, which side of the road it's on. But for just an attachment, it's around 5. If we need to run it, if the water's on the other side of the road or up the street, and we need to run it, it may be another 5 as well. So
I suppose just in advance of the council meeting, if we could get a better feel of that.
yep, okay.
Thanks.
Just a quick question. I believe that RSL have a liquor licence, correct, Mr. Gibson? Yes. Yeah. So we've discussed in the past how some of the venues that have liquor licences have an advantage over some of our other venues in the ability, the potential to raise revenue. So I'm curious if that has been considered at all in this particular instance, or it's just been solely based on the land valuations.
Through Madam Mayor, the latter, in accordance with the council adopted community leasing framework, the leasing framework doesn't make any dispensation or doesn't penalise or otherwise if there's a bar. So the community leasing framework provides a 10% of GRV equation, and in this instance that equates to $1,500 a year.
Okay. The only reason I ask is out of interest, because clearly if you have increasing membership and you have an ability to raise revenue through a liquor licence, that's why I asked whether there was a consideration of that. It came up during one of the other leases some time ago, a discussion. But in any case, the framework indicates it's solely determined through the land valuation. Right, okay. Okay, I did have other questions, but they're very minor, so I'll leave it at that unless anyone else has got any questions. Okay. So on that note, we will move on to 8.2, which is proposed tree pruning.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Welcome.
Proposed tree pruning for Lot 2, Barton Parade, Bassendean. Mr. Gibson.
Through you, Madam Mayor, this report is asking Council to consider the pruning of a tree that is protected by a tree preservation order. The proposal is quite benign and it's only coming to Council for a decision due to the current limitations on the delegation manual. But that is something that's proposed to be resolved by Part 2 of the staff recommendation.
Any questions, councillors? Okay, so Councillor Plifka.
Is that completely open, the ability to cut or prune, or is it limited to certain size limbs? So that delegation that's being proposed.
Through you, Madam Mayor, as it's currently prepared, it would be open, there'd be no limitation in terms of size or scale. The limitation would be on the agreement of the neighbours, but obviously the application, the agreement of the neighbours notwithstanding, the proposal will still need to be assessed by town staff. And if town staff formed the view that the pruning was a little bit excessive, it would be open to council, it would be open to staff to refer the matter to council for a decision.
So one of these large trees, though, potentially you could cut off maybe a lateral branch that might comprise a third of the size of the tree, and that wouldn't come before council, that would be resolved by delegation.
Through Madam Mayor, if the delegation was granted and if staff assessed the application and found that it was acceptable, and both those things applied, yes, it could be resolved by staff. If council wanted to put limitations on the delegation, it could certainly do that.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
I've just got a quick question, Madam Mayor,
Okay.
and through you to Mr Gibson. It says in the general item that's proposed to be taken care of by a contractor. Is that something that is grey area, or is it a scenario where there will be an appropriate contractor to do the works instead of the residents themselves?
Through you, Madam Mayor, we haven't sought fit to impose that as a requirement. The pruning is actually quite minor, and our staff, one of whom sits in Phil's area, is satisfied that the scale of the pruning is quite immaterial, and it's great that they're proposing to be done by a contractor, but if it was done domestically, that would be okay as well.
Okay, councillors, if that's all, we'll move on to the next item, which is the proposed change of use warehouse, veterinary clinic 184 Railway Parade, Bassendean. Again, Mr Gibson.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the purpose of this report is for council to consider an application for development approval for a veterinary clinic, or veterinary centre. The application again is quite benign and has only come to council for a decision due to it involving a use not listed in local planning scheme number 10, and that's just a sort of a minor planning technicality which is discussed on page 15. Based on the assessment of the proposal though, it is supported and it's recommended to be approved by council.
Councillors, any questions? Councillor Ames.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you to Mr Gibson. Seems like a very large space for a veterinary clinic. Obviously, we don't know what their operations are, but is there a scenario where there might be a recommendation to ensure that there's no subleasing or anything that might be done internally for this to be approved? I don't know, it just seems quite a large space for a veterinary clinic.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the approval would be for that tenancy to be used for a veterinary centre, and it would therefore be outside of the approval to be used for anything else. If it was sublet, that's not in of itself a problem, so long as it was being used as a veterinary centre. But if, say, the landowner or the lessee found the space was too large and wanted to use it for something completely different, they couldn't do that under the guise of what is intended to be the development approval issued by council. They would need to come back and get a supplementary approval, subsequent approval, sorry, for some other use. So long as they accord with the veterinary centre land use, staff have no concerns.
Councillor Plifka.
So in terms of the animals that can be treated, would that be limited to animals that can reside in the town, or you could bring other sorts of animals in from outside? Well, if it's so large, I mean, they might use it as some sort of equine clinic.
Through Madam Mayor, there's no issue with the origin of the animals.
All right. Yeah, it's big.
Okay.
Carry on.
So we'll move on to item 8. Next item. I believe this is Acting Director of Corporate Services, Raj.
Sorry.
through the chair, this paper is written to present to council the proposed fleet and plant replacement program for the next 4 years and to recommend a funding model. While this has been discussed with councillors in general terms during the budget workshops, the report presented to council contains further detail on the full 4-year replacement program and the potential funding options. The recommended funding option is twofold. One is to use the plant and equipment reserve to fund the light fleet program, and the second one is to use debt financing in the form of a revolving line of credit to fund the heavy plant and equipment program. This option will require a change in the name and purpose of the plant and equipment reserve as outlined in the report. It is considered financially sustainable solution which will enable the much needed replacement of aged heavy plant and equipment and change in the management of fleet from an operating lease model to a more cost-effective ownership model. Thank you.
Questions, councillors? Okay, Councillor Carter?
Yes, I believe this is also a confidential item, as the questions might...
The attachment. If the questions relate to anything in the attachment, we may need to go behind closed doors.
Okay, so are we going to be leaving that to when we're in confidential items, or...?
I would suggest we deal with it straight away if there are any confidential.
I'm not too sure whether they're confidential or not, but I don't want to
I think
breach confidentiality.
I was rattling with this earlier, and it really depends on the questions. I know that my questions actually don't go into the confidential document, but if your question actually relates to something that's in the confidential document, yes, we will have to go behind closed doors. So it's a bit of a judgment call on your part, but I would err on the side of caution if you think it's going to relate to any of the material in confidential. And if we can move behind closed doors if that is what you would desire.
I would not like to breach confidentialities, but I do have some questions.
Okay.
Any other questions before we do?
So do we want to take other questions before we go behind closed doors?
Yeah, my questions are just by reference to the agenda that everyone has a copy of.
Okay, so we'll do those questions first, and then if anybody still has a desire to go behind closed doors, we'll do so. So, Councillor Plifka?
Yes, it's just on page 24 of the agenda. We're talking about the potential increases to rates for each of the various models. So there we've got raise additional rates to fund each year of the program. Obviously, there's some pretty large figures there as to how the rates would increase in addition to any other increases that we would require. Do we have a similar statement on the impact on rates if we were to take the loan model? And with the loan model, are we assuming certain interest rates, just given that the RBA is providing a bit of uncertainty at the moment?
Through the chair, the revolving line credit facility would be based on the cash rate, plus on top of that there is a margin that the bank would charge. The quotation we've got is from our merchant banker, but having said that, if we do get the approval, we would go to the market and seek out quotes as to what is the best available. On average, we're seeing with a revolving line credit facility.
We're probably not worrying about the actual figures and getting into the particulars, but say that for every percent that the RBA increases the base rate, what impact is that going to have on our rates? Obviously, you probably don't have that to hand. That might be a question, and you can do that calculation for next time.
Yeah. On one hand, you have obviously the interest cost that you'd be having to pay on the facility, but on the other hand, you have the efficiencies and savings that you would have also from reduced maintenance and costs that are required to manage the heavy plant and fleet that is at the moment and quite aged. So what we are saying is actually we will have actually savings on top of the interest costs that we would incur. So that's why we've negated those two.
But you'd reach a tipping point. I mean, if the interest rates get to a certain amount,
Yes.
then we're going to start to move into negative territory as against the other models.
Yes, at the moment, we haven't worked that out, but we could model that out. Having said that, the alternate option is basically one is to either raise rates or to go through a operating lease item, which would be even more expensive to manage. So this is actually a more cost-effective model that we would have to work with.
Yeah, so I guess the question would just be that, what is the impact of each 1% increase in the base rate?
Yeah.
Just so we can then, I suppose you might also have an opinion to provide in terms of how likely it is and how high that may well go, although the RBA is not making it too easy for anyone, so we'll leave that for you.
At the moment, the projected cash rate is expected to go up to 3% by end of next year.
Right.
Which in our case, at the moment, if it's sitting at 0.85, we are looking at a margin of at least another 3 or 4% on top of that, as for the line of credit facility. So you have to add another 3% on top of that, would be about equivalent to possibly 1% in rates.
So that if it goes to the maximum 3% as predicted.
Yeah,
Okay.
because
Thanks.
it's an interest component effect.
Yeah.
Thanks.
If I can ask a question at this point in time. The plant and equipment reserve has a total of 468,000 in there at the moment. And it's proposed to use those funds to fund approximately close to half of the first year requirements of the fleet and plant replacement program. So if council was of a mind to use those funds to fund the heavy equipment, my question relates to the other vehicles that are on lease, because you've got two portions as far as I can tell to the first year. One is the heavy fleet, which is about 600,000 from memory without looking at the figures. I've actually got it written down somewhere. And then the balance is other vehicles that are on lease. Is that correct?
Through the chair, yes, primarily they are on lease. However, there are some vehicles that are council owned that are also heavily aged, which would be also part of the replacement program.
In that first year?
Yes.
Okay.
But most of them are, I would say the bulk of them are in the novated lease the operating lease program.
Okay. So my question relates to, if we delayed replacing those vehicles that are already under a lease situation, what negative impact would that have? Because my assumption is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, my assumption is those ones that are under lease are still in reasonable condition, and you would only be incurring the lease charges for an additional year. So I'm interested in what the financial impacts would be if we retained the lease for an extra year and looked at more the heavy vehicle replacement program. And I'm happy if you want to take that on notice.
No, it's actually in the report, and I think it's on, it's where the chart is. We're paying approximately $113,000 at the moment.
20?
So,
That was for the 4 years, wasn't it?
no, that's the amount we're paying annually for the year. So
Okay.
$113,685 as of 30th June 2022. So if we were to extend it by one more year, that's the amount we would be paying as a approximate.
Okay, so the 113, yep, I've got it up here. Right, okay. Okay, Does anyone else want to ask a question while I think? Councillor Carter.
Oh, I have some that are not, I'm sure that are not. The state and federal governments have announced forthcoming incentives for electric vehicles. Are any of these new vehicles that we're considering purchasing going to be electric?
Through the chair, the vehicles that are in the program for year one are pickups, utes, and at the moment there are actually no available options in Australian market for a electric vehicle that is a pickup or ute. In the future, yes, once they do come up, certainly we will be looking at it. And in my modelling, I have shown what we would entertain as a cost, which we have done which is a sedan. So at the moment, we have 3 hybrid vehicles that we use as pool cars. And once that becomes available for replacement, definitely we would be looking at electric vehicle options. The price is also starting to come down, so it is starting to get a bit more competitive. I was looking at yesterday, BYD is introducing a model which is about $44,000, and certainly we get state fleet pricing, which would be even cheaper than that. So they are looking much more attractive now.
Okay.
If I may, Madam Mayor, there is the town is looking at an electric mower option to start bringing into the fleet, and that's something that we've only just started doing the early investigations in that, and there's a mower currently in the program for next year, and we'll consider that as an electric mower, and we'll price that up and see if that can work.
That brings me to a follow-up question, may I? Yes, it's also because there is difficulty in getting vehicles because of global supply issues and all sorts of things. So if we've got this for a year for a certain amount and we can't get those vehicles, and yet we've borrowed the money, how does that work?
So as I stated in the report, the line of credit facility only triggers when the commitment is paid. So even we could order a vehicle now,
right,
and the invoice is obviously raised, but the delivery and the payment may come out after, let's say, 9 months when the vehicle is delivered.
Okay.
So the line of credit only triggers at that point in time. However, the line of credit allows us to make that commitment.
So I've got a couple more councillors. I've got Councillor McLennan first and Councillor Polifka wanting to ask questions. So Councillor McLennan.
Yeah, so my question sort of follows on from Kath's and Jenny's. I would like, wherever possible, for any new vehicle that's purchased to be electric from now on. And obviously there are some where that's not possible yet, all of the heavy vehicles. But in terms of like the range of vehicles and so on that you've mentioned, nothing is currently available. The president of the Electric Vehicle Society lives in Bassendean, and my husband is also a member. And there are anticipated to be vehicles that would meet those requirements either in Australia this year or sometime next year. Would it be possible to put together a scenario for us where if we removed those vehicles that are currently in the year one and delayed them for a year so the council could consider those 2 options next week? Does that make sense?
I guess the issue at the moment is certainly an issue of supply, first of all, even for the vehicles that we are talking about. But the availability of electric vehicles is probably, there is no certainty there that they are available. So to delay the program, I think would be have a more negative effect on the town. And certainly what we are seeing is that the vehicles that are in year one that are being put up for replacement are ones where the operating lease term is expiring, and to continue with that program, as we've demonstrated in the report, is actually more expensive to continue with. So the benefits that we would get from converting those vehicles to town vehicles would far outweigh what we have at the moment. Certainly, if those options become available, what we can do is put these vehicles back onto auction, and the residual values that we would get would be higher than what is estimated. and the funds that we get from that can be reapplied for electric vehicle options. So I don't see much advantage in delaying the plant replacement program. We can certainly change it and review it every year as part of the long-term financial reviews.
I
Thank you.
don't think it was
mean to-
delay. You weren't talking about delay, you were talking about partial delay, weren't you? Yeah.
Well, I guess what Raj has just said, those vehicles need replacing now, either a new lease or a purchase, and there's nothing to purchase at the moment. But sorry, the report is excellent, so I wasn't meaning to criticise your report, just trying to understand how we could, and it's clear from your report that financially it would be beneficial to the town. It's more balancing the financial benefit with making sure that we're making our purchases in alignment with our stated values. That's my concern.
Yeah, okay. Councillor Plivka.
Following on from that, delaying for a year or so. So say purchasing vehicles this year is more expensive than it will be in coming years. I mean, for example, I'm not sure we have any Land Cruisers in our fleet, but they've gone up by an astronomical amount recently. So I mean, those sorts of vehicles might ease off over time. So in terms of the delay, cost-wise, I mean, that could potentially work. I understand there are lease commitments that we'd need to deal with. But for Mr. Adams, in terms of those sorts of delays, so continuing to use the existing for a year or so, would that present any major difficulties?
To Madam Mayor, once the budget's adopted, which I think we're planning to adopt on early July, by the time we get the specifications out, it will take it'll take 12 to 18 months to land the vehicles before they arrive, and therefore the line of credit kicks in. As Raj explained, it's advantageous to the town to end these lease arrangements as soon as possible. So I think the best course of action for the town is we adopt the budget and move forward with this plan, which I think is financially sound. We do all acknowledge the supply chain issues that we're having, but with the way we've set up the line of credit, the expense the credit doesn't kick in until the plant arrives. So. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that certainly assists. And in respect of electric vehicles, I mean, for just moving passengers around, that's fine. In terms of the electric mower that you mentioned, is that something which would be suitable for people operating all day long and cutting reserves, or is it more for domestic use?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that's one of the things we're concerned about. It might. We've been told by the supplier that it will last a full shift, like 8 to 10 hours, but we've got concerns that will it be able to last 8 to 10 hours in a heavy duty environment such as ours? So that's a concern. And what would that mean if it can't? Do we need to have the capacity to power up at our reserves? Charging them overnight is also a concern. So there's a few infrastructure issues around it, and we're just not. Although we were quite impressed with the machine, in a cost comparison, I think we spend around $30,000 on a new mower, and we get about $9,000 back on the trading. So it costs us around the $21,000. This mower would be $50,000, so there's an increased cost there. But we do believe that it will. Maybe it's more hope than believe, but we hope that it will last longer. It's got less moving parts, and you get a warranty on the battery, but. So there's a bit more work that we have to do, but we are hoping to bring a sort of a business case approach to council to consider that.
These electric offerings, are they coming from reputable legacy manufacturers of lawnmowers that are simply just electrifying their models, or is it a new brand entirely? The likes of, say, Toro, do they make an electric mower?
Yeah, look, yes, through you, Madam Mayor, good question, Councillor. We in the last couple of weeks we've found out that our regular supplier has now got these electric mowers, and that's the next place we'll be heading. So we did get, it was a new supplier in the market who approached us, and we looked at it. We did a trial, and it all came up quite good. But we've recently discovered that our regular supplier has these vehicles, so we're more interested in talking to them, because we want to make sure that we make the right decision.
One quick final question. The people on the ground that will be operating these machines, are they excited?
They get, through you, Madam Mayor, they get excited about certain things. I'm not sure mowing lawns excites them.
No, the new technology, is that something which they're
Yeah,
look, and happy about?
Yeah, the supervisor was keen with the proposal. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So I have a question. I haven't seen any sort of planning for transitioning the entire fleet over a period of time to a more sustainable and economical fleet. And this doesn't necessarily have to be electrical vehicles. It could be hybrid vehicles. It could be all sorts of different technologies. So do we have any sort of plan like that in place, or it's still being developed?
I think
We could both have a crack at that one. I suppose to you, Madam Mayor, I suppose the best answer is that we don't have that plan in place at the moment. It's not to say that Nicole and I haven't spoken about it. We do talk about it. I suppose the issue is that, you know, we're bringing in light vehicles to electric light vehicles, so that's a commitment that we're making. But without having the supply of utes or heavy vehicles in that electric range,
It's not just electric.
Understood. We can't really transition to that plan. The hybrid models do not operate due to the short distances we drive. The hybrid models do not operate as a hybrid model. They essentially operate as a diesel vehicle with a hybrid tag on it. Hybrid vehicles need to get up to a certain drive at 60 plus kilometres an hour for a certain period of time before the hybrid capacity of the engines kick in. So we don't have that. We're not set up in a way that can enable that, or our local infrastructure is not set up in that way.
So let me frame the question differently. Do we have a transition plan to a more economical fleet? Because there are obviously other councils that have transitioned to different vehicles, and I have said this before, that there are some light vehicle fleets where they've transitioned from larger vehicles down to smaller vehicles to reduce their running costs and buy-in costs. So I'm interested in how this council will look at their fleet rather than replacing like for like. Are we actually looking at a process where we can look at the fleet in its entirety, economical, how to reduce the running costs and buying costs instead of replacing like for like? That's my interest.
Through you, Madam Mayor. So we have a corporate emissions reduction strategy that was approved by the Executive on Monday, and that does include an action to review the fleet annually prior to the budget being prepared. It's mainly focused on looking at conversion to battery electric vehicles, but the current fleet is already minimised. We only have 3 vehicles that are used for administration purposes, and they're all hybrids. And the remaining vehicles are all operationally based, so they're chosen due to the requirements for how they're needed operationally, so that's what they're based on. So it's not possible to convert those to more efficient vehicles apart from converting the technology. They're needed for a particular purpose, like the rangers, utes, the vehicles that are used by park staff and engineering staff. So at the moment, that is considered at the moment, and we're also looking to improve that in the future.
Okay. Any other questions, councillors? Okay.
Excuse me, Madam Mayor, can I just be excused to go to the bathroom?
Okay, 8.5 is the street and reserve tree policy. So, Mr. Adams, would you like to speak to this particular item?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The purpose of this report is for Council to consider an updated and amended street and reserve trees policy. There has been some significant changes throughout the document, not the least being to include all trees under the town's land management, nominally including the reserve trees in the policy. Previously it was just the street trees. And most of the items have been covered in the recent bulletin and workshop. The overarching aim of the policy is to achieve a continuous tree canopy with planting of biodiversity corridors. And throughout the document we've included some definitions, included an area on street tree planting, street tree reserve tree criteria. We've removed some sections in street tree repair and replacement, and made some amendments to enable tree pruning and removal to be considered under circumstances such as causing harm or damage to infrastructure and essential public liability risks determined by a recognised tree assessment. And I think that covers it as an introduction.
Okay, so I'll open up to councillors for questions. Councillor Plivka.
Yeah, so this policy is for planting of trees on land that the town owns. Who is the policy actually directed at? Is this just to inform staff as to how things are to occur?
Yes, through you, Madam Mayor, it's to provide direction for the town, and I think this marks an improvement. From recollection, I think we updated the street tree policy about a year ago, which improved our gave us improved direction for our internal processes and systems, and I think this policy update of this policy helps us to go further in that direction of improving our internal processes and systems.
Thanks.
I have a question, Mr. Adams, naturally on this one. You did receive quite a bit of feedback from both myself and the Deputy Mayor. I'm curious about a comment that you made that some of the changes or suggestions that were made should belong in a plan that sits underneath this policy. And my curiosity on that item, that remark is spiked because having looked at some of the other policies, including the Netherlands one that I sent to you, they include all of those things actually in their policy. So I'm just trying to understand the logic behind your comment there that some of these things that we had included as a potential amendment would not appear and do not appear. Why would they sit in the plan underneath this? That's one of the questions.
Yep, thanks, Madam Mayor. I think I made comment about how they could sit within a policy, but I didn't consider them to be to really aid in the decision-making process. There were many, there's different councils seem to have quite different policies. If you look at the City of Perth policy, some of their policies, some of them are like 20 pages long, and I don't think that's like an appropriate way to present a policy, whereas policies I think should be within, short and sharp. Many of the items that were raised, we do as a matter within our own internal systems and processes already. I think my comment was that we didn't have a major concern about those being included, but we would prefer them to sit in the plan. But I can put them back into the policy.
I'll have another reading again. There was just a curiosity as to why some policies would include all of that information, and it was curiosity. And Councillor McLennan?
Thank you. Mr. Adams, I'm not sure when you provided it to us and what format it was in, but recently you also provided a tree planting or a species planting list, and it's referred to in the policy. And then I think at the workshop we discussed having two different approved trees for reserves versus verges. Am I on the right track at the moment? You're looking vague.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I don't recall having two different tree planting lists.
We didn't have two, but we discussed the potential for there to be two, acknowledging that some of the trees on the list may not be suitable for verges, while some on the list may not be suitable for reserves.
Yep.
And I know it's not embedded in this policy, but the fact that it's referenced in the policy, when I saw the list previously, there are a number of species on there which we'd had previous discussions about not being ideal. So in particular, there was the bottle brushes and so on, which were then discussed about their potential to obscure vision at when people are reversing, and I think Councillor Poliska mentioned not providing the ability to park underneath and so on. So I'm just wondering where those tree species list or lists will fit, and if that's something that's operationally you're planning on approving, or something that Council will also have input into.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. Through you, Madam Mayor, we did take direction from the information we received over the last couple of years on the preferred species. The list has evolved somewhat, and the involvement of the list has come from a lot of resident requests, and also, I suppose, an assessment from our horticultural area and our arborist on what trees are suitable, and that's how our list is formed. My plan is that the list will remain part of it's yet to be named, but our implementation planning document, and I think that's an appropriate place for that to sit.
I think absolutely the staff should be providing, and especially should be providing Council with the recommendations about what trees are actually appropriate, because we don't have that knowledge. But if there were certain species we went, no, there's enough of them in the town, we need other things, is there the opportunity for that to be reflected in those lists?
Yeah, look, through you, Madam Mayor, I think that's appropriate. I don't think we're planting bottle brushes. They might be.
It was on the list.
It is on the list, right? Sorry. I don't think we've planted any. The bottle brushes have. There's bottle brushes across the Perth metropolitan area have a fungus. There's a fungus issue, and a lot of them are dying off. So it's not something that we would plant. I do note I think it's our highest percentage tree in the town. But I don't recall us purchasing or planting any in recent times. But that does surprise me that it's on the list, but I do need to check.
Thank you for checking.
Can I just follow on with a question on that? We clearly have different soil types in the town, clay soils in some areas and sandy soils. Where I live, it's all sand. So when you're looking at these tree lists, are they actually also for specific areas where you know the soil types are vastly different?
Yes, thanks, Madam Mayor. Our arborist, tree planting officer, he does assess the locations and the soil type and the general environment and takes all those into consideration.
And this is a side question. With our residents wanting trees for their verges when they adopt a verge tree, do they also get a list that is specific to the soil type in their area? Because if they're looking at a full list, I'm curious about if they want something that is not suited to clay soils, how do you deal with that?
Yes, thanks, Madam Mayor. Yes, we do manage that with the residents to ensure that, you know, our preferred tree is planted. Sometimes that does take a while and a bit of to and froing, but yeah.
I'm sure it does. So thank you, sorry, Councillor Carter.
Oh, very briefly, thank you, Madam Mayor. Could I ask, have we considered the bird life as well? Because in banning bottle brushes, I think some honey eaters might get a bit upset because they go mad on the blossoms.
About the
yeah.
verge trees, not banning bottle brushes.
No, but our verge trees, you know, yes, I know, and they make a mess, I do understand, but they are a great source of food for certainly our little foraging birds like the 28s and the honey eaters and the wattlebirds.
Thanks, Councillor, and to you, Madam Mayor. Look, the percentage of bottle brushes is quite high already in the town, and I suppose we do ensure we're planting trees that are providing a food source to the native birds and animals, and we are improving our planning and implementation to incorporate the biodiversity corridors, and I don't think we need to be planting a lot of bottle brushes, bearing in mind that they do have this fungus issue which the industry has not resolved. It's an ongoing, they don't know how to solve that problem, and the bottle brushes are continually dying out, and we are regularly removing them.
One quick follow-up question. Will the list of species that we do plant be available to the public, be on the website?
Yes, I think through you, Madam Mayor, it is currently on the website. Yeah.
Thank you.
And thank you. I would also add that the dot point that I inserted for street and reserve tree criteria, the biodiversity corridors section was removed. Which is why I laughed. So, okay, we'll, Councillor Plivka, yeah.
Yes, just on tree removal, so point 5B, we're saying that the town will not support a request to remove a tree for the following reasons, and 5B is that the tree obscures or has the potential to obscure access to light. So if a resident petitions the town in that way, presumably on the strength of that, that would just be ignored. Is there any scope in that situation to offer perhaps a deciduous tree to protect winter sunlight, if that's a significant issue for them?
Thanks, Councillor. Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor, the main driver for that clause is the obscuring of light in regards to their grass. That's the main.
Oh, okay, that wasn't immediately apparent from that. I mean, perhaps if that was what we're driving at there, perhaps would it be possible to make that more apparent? So, I mean, if it's a large tree that's completely shading a living area of some sort, and simply providing a deciduous tree would solve that, then perhaps that's something which we could accommodate.
That's right, Councillor. Through you, Madam Mayor, some of the things we've spoken about is trees, is deciduous trees. They're currently not on the list, and I think that's an improvement that we can make going forward. Some of the things that we have looked at is trees with that sort of grow more upright, have a greater trunk, and then grow out above that, and that can let some light in as well. So there are species that we are looking at, and if it does become quite confrontational with the resident, what we'll generally default to is our current practice, which is just to park that planting of a tree on the verge for that year, and then we'll leave it open to plant trees on the verges for coming years.
But that's specifically referring to removal of a mature tree, though, isn't it? That clause is not referring it's for removal of a mature tree.
Yeah.
Or just removal of trees. It doesn't really say the state of growth, but say we put something in 5-10 years ago and it produces a significant issue for people, then that might be something that we could accommodate. If it's a 100-year-old tree, then they might be tough luck.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, councillors, on that note, if we would like to move on, and that is item 8.6. Councillor Carter is leaving the room.
Thank you.
Thank you. Having declared an interest in this item. So this is for the additions and alterations to existing tavern Bassendean Hotel. And so, Mr. Gibson, would you like to speak to this?
Through Madam Mayor, the purpose of this report is the Council to consider an application for development approval for the use of the top floor of the Bassendean Hotel. Development approval, as councillors will be aware, has previously been granted for the substantive refurbishment of the site. This application is complementary to that previous approval. The main planning issues for consideration are, as set out in the report, traffic and car parking, both of which have been assessed and deemed to be acceptable, as set out in the report. It is recommended that Council approve the application. However, it is open to Council to refuse it if it so chooses, due to those aforementioned parking and traffic concerns. In that instance, and putting aside any possibility of a SAT review, the top floor would remain unused, limiting the functionality of the broader building and reducing the activation of the town centre. So it's staff's recommendation that it be approved.
Councillor McLennan.
My question in no way influences the decision making on this item, but I'm just interested, considering this application was submitted by the art group, so the current, or I assume it's still the owner or whatever, but it's since been purchased by somebody else. Have there been any conversation around whether the new owners intend to follow through on this plan?
Through Madam Mayor, the applicant, as stated in the report, will continue to own the site. And they will own the land. They will own the building that sits upon the land. But the operation of the business has been sold. But the intention is that it be operated as if it were the current owner.
Okay,
Thank you.
that's interesting.
I'm sorry for missing that in your report.
Any other questions, councillors? Okay. Okay, Councillor Plifka first, then Councillor Ames.
I see, Gibson, through the, in your report you mentioned that there was a decision where the tree protection buffer was altered. So was that just by way of background, and that has no bearing on what's occurring going forward?
That's correct. Through Madam Mayor, it's just historical context of the previous consideration by Council.
Thanks.
Councillor Ames.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you to Mr. Gibson. The recommendations for 8.6 just regarding the installation or subject to the following conditions, mainly to ensure that our hotel remains in as heritage viewing as possible whilst, let me rephrase the question. A lot of the stuff that is in your recommendation is due to the fact there's a lot of noise testing that's being done within the town centre. These obviously don't have to be put into play, just due to that we want to obviously keep the facade as heritage listed as possible. but with the noise reports that have been put in the attachments, would there be any other type of noise buffering installations that could be done on the town if, done on the infrastructure if these ones weren't permitted? That sort of makes sense, Mr. Gibson?
Through Madam Mayor, I'll have a go.
Cool.
In terms of the first two recommended conditions, they are to ensure that the site does not appear boarded up, that it provides good interaction with the street. So less about the heritage and more about sort of passive surveillance and appropriate interaction with the street. And even if this was a brand new building built from scratch, we'd look to impose those conditions so you're not getting roller shutters or curtains or things that sort of block the built form from the street. Condition number 3, of course, is in regard to the acoustic performance of the site. Based on the modelling and the acoustic report and the technical addendum, the acoustic engineer is satisfied that the premises will comply with the noise regs. If in the operation of the hotel there's noise complaints or noise concerns, they'd obviously be looked into by our environmental health officers, and if there's rectification works required or changes to the way they operate, that would be a consequence of those investigations. But no, certainly conditions 1 and 2 are less so about the acoustic performance and more so about passive surveillance.
Visual information. Okay, Iris, thank you.
Okay, so with that, I think we can invite Councillor Carter back in, and we'll move on to item 8.7, which is the draft local planning policy rights of way. Again, Mr. Gibson, you're very popular. Welcome back, Councillor Carter.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
So we're now on to item 8.7, which is the draft local planning policy rights of way. And Mr. Gibson is just about to give a short overview on this one.
Through Madam Mayor, the purpose of this report is for Council to consider its policy settings in relation to subdivision and development on land abutting the various rights of way scattered around the district. Council will recall the recent determination of the right of way strategy, with one of the recommended actions in that strategy being the preparation of a local planning policy. Staff subsequently prepared that draft LPP for Council's consideration, which was circulated in the 30th of May CEO bulletin. Ultimately, it's recommended that the Council adopt the policy for the purpose of advertising, noting, of course, that it will have another opportunity to consider the matter following the consultation period.
Thank you. Councillor McLennan.
Thank you. I'm just interested in clause 5.1c. So on page 2 of the policy. So it says, in approving an application for the development of land abutting the right of way, a condition will be imposed requiring a financial contribution to be made to the upgrading of the full width of the right of way for the full length of the lot and to an urban standard. Are you able to provide a bit more clarity around how that would work, given that different owners are likely to develop at very different times?
Through Madam Mayor, yes, so a condition, assuming Council adopts the policy ultimately as proposed, and obviously we know that it's yet to be advertised, but if this policy was to be adopted in its current form, if an application for development approval or subdivision approval was granted, it would be recommended that a condition be imposed requiring the financial contribution to be made to the town. Obviously then the town would need to make a decision or a series of decisions about when it chooses to use those funds to undertake the upgrading works, because obviously development will occur in a staged, incremental, unpredictable manner, and therefore the contributions inwards will be similarly unpredictable. So at some point you'd expect the council would make a decision that a critical mass of contributions have accumulated, and therefore thereafter go and upgrade the right of way, knowing that the balance of funds will amount and accrue over time. But it may well be that if the town makes a decision to not upgrade the right of way until every contribution has been received, there's merit in that potentially, but there's also the devaluing of the initial contributions received many years earlier. So this policy provision isn't intended to solve all of those issues and resolve them all. It's simply providing a head of power through an LPP to actually take contributions in the first place. It is very open to council to remove that condition or remove that provision and therefore not impose those conditions, in which case development will occur at budding rights of way, council will not be collecting any funds. It will still ultimately fall to council to upgrade those rights of way. So for that reason, it's staff recommendation that council actually seek to take contributions where the opportunity arises.
Thank you for that. Can you give us an indication of how much, in current costs we'd be expecting to take per lot? And I know it's a ballpark figure. And also, you've mentioned a scenario where potentially council would say, right, we've collected X amount of contributions. What would happen in future if another lot developed after it had been upgraded? Would they still then be required to retrospectively contribute to what's already been developed?
Through Madam Mayor, yeah, in terms of the second question, absolutely. If they are going to derive a benefit from either a future or previously upgraded right of way, it is appropriate, in our view, to impose that condition. In terms of what the cost will be, that will differ for each right of way because the infrastructure team has been doing a bit of work on broad scoping out of the potential costs and spreading those over the linear meterage of each right of way, so it will be different for each right of way. And in some cases, the town will need to acknowledge that subdivision and development has already occurred and therefore there's no subsequent trigger, so you've got to remove some of the lots from the calculation methodology, and when you do that, the cost proportionally goes up. So that will be brought back to council via the schedule of fees and charges. That will be the mechanism of adopting the actual figures, but that would be based on a proportionate share of the total cost. It would obviously be open to council at that point to seek to subsidise the costs if council so chose.
Thank you.
Councillor Polifka.
Director Gibson, you might recall going to the right-of-way strategy, I think we called it. There were some of those rights-of-way which were proposed to be closed, which extended up into the transit corridor areas, as shown in the current strategy. So we obviously preserved those, and I see that 5.2A and 5.3A both pick up on that potential. Given that they both radically alter the way in which people that have land that abut a right-of-way can develop their land, do we need to strengthen that by putting something in the, potentially putting something in the scheme?
Through Madam Mayor, no, I don't think we could, but it's not considered necessary. The policy position would be sufficient and has been demonstrated to be sufficient in other local government areas.
Yeah, it's good policy. I just want to make sure that we can enforce that, because I mean, the more street activation, the more the rights of way can be used, and the better the development, in my view, anyway.
Okay, councillors, if we have no other questions, we'll move on to the next item, which is the draft local planning strategy. And Mr. Gibson, again.
Through Madam Mayor, the purpose of this report is for council to note the revised draft local planning strategy for the district and to revoke a number of previous resolutions which are now redundant. As the report states, and as councillors are aware, the draft strategy was recently certified by the Statutory Planning Committee of the Western Australian Planning Commission as being appropriate and acceptable to advertise, and that is what now must occur. Before doing that, though, it was considered appropriate for council to formally consider the matter, albeit only for noting purposes. There is an omission in the officer report, only a minor one though, and that's the absence of a reference to the councillor workshop on the 14th of June being last Tuesday, so that would be updated during the week. In any event, based on the decision from the SPC, the strategy must now be advertised, and we expect that to occur across July and August.
Okay, councillors, any questions on this item? Okay. Councillor Plivka.
So, in this, what we're proposing there, so the, oh, sorry, I misunderstood something, so I'll leave that.
So, moving on, are we? Yes? Okay. So, councillors, that brings us to item 8.9, disposal of town-owned land. So I'll ask the Deputy Mayor to preside over this item, as I've declared an interest. Okay. Thank you. Mr. Gibson.
Through Madam Deputy Mayor, this report is for council to consider its options in relation to a town-owned lot, which is located on Hamilton Street. Council has previously considered this matter on a number of occasions, and this current report is provided in response to Council's previous June 2021 resolution. It is recommended that Council advise of its preferred option, and officers are obviously able to assist during the week with the preparation of appropriate wording for any such option. I will remind councillors that whilst the report is not confidential, the two attachments are, and if the questioning is going to relate to those attachments, we may need to go behind closed doors.
Thank you. Questions, councillors?
Just in terms of the different permutations there in the agenda, so the only thing that's confidential are the values ascribed, is that correct?
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, the valuation report from the valuer and the summary table that...
those are the only two
that's
things.
correct.
Okay.
If we were to take the path of the subdividing the amalgamated lot, what would be the costs involved in preparing the land to create those lots? So both the earthworks and statutory and other costs.
Through Madam Deputy Mayor, which option are you referring to? Sorry?
So that's amalgamate and create 4 lots. So
Valuation 4.
Okay.
both the 1400 and the 400 odd get put together. So it's the
Through Madam Deputy Mayor, it would probably be in the order of about, would be a driveway access issue. If you're going to do a survey strata development, that would be in the order of $20,000 to service the 4 lots. But there's also the additional cost which would apply irrespective, being approximately $40,000, or probably said $10,000 in administrative tasks, and $70,000 in earthworks.
Was it 70, did you say? What was the last figure you gave?
Sorry.
The earthworks?
The civil works, $70,000.
So that, I presume the civil works are to raise the 400 odd square metres to the same level as has been done already on the 1400?
Through Madam Deputy, correct. So removal of part of the existing retaining wall, the construction of a new retaining wall to tie into what's left of the existing retaining wall, and the filling and compacting.
So the aggregate, round terms, about 100 is what's going to cost to do all of that. All right, thanks.
Any other questions? Easy. Would you like to Hmm? Yeah. Thank you, Councillor McLennan. So we'll move on to item 8.10, relocation of Town Administration Centre. That would be yourself.
Thanks
Ms.
very
Maps.
much, Madam Mayor. Unfortunately, Mr White cannot be here this evening, so I'll try and do him proud. This report is for Council to consider a proposal to relocate the town's administration staff in order to vacate 35 Old Perth Road to free up the site for other potential uses. The site is owned freehold by the town and it's been identified in the Town Centre Master Plan as suitable for mixed-use development of up to 5 stories, including potentially 10 multiple dwellings or apartments. The Town's land asset strategy adopted by Council recommends the town seeks to accommodate existing staff at other locations, including 48 Old Perth Road, the library and Seniors and Disability Services site in Ashfield. Once that has occurred, it's recommended the town seeks to redevelop the site generally in accordance with the current zoning and the adopted Town Centre Master Plan. This proposal also aligns with our corporate business plan in terms of a priority to develop a plan for co-location of the administration in 21-22. At the special council meeting on the 29th of July 2021, to facilitate the co-location, council decided the office relocation be removed from the capital budget and allocated $30,000 from the operational budget for preparation of a detailed project plan, including project costs for consideration by council and allocation of $220,000 to the future projects reserved to provide funds for the project should council endorse the project plan. So council has been provided with a copy of the project plan as a confidential agenda item. This project will create a consolidated workspace and will deliver a number of benefits, including improved collaboration and communication, and also provide for the effective and sustainable use of the town's assets whilst reducing costs and generating income for the town. 2 significant changes have occurred since council last considered the proposal. So the first one was the divestment of Seniors and Disability Services, which will occur by the end of this financial year, which means our admin offices at Colston Road in Ashfield will be available for use from the 1st of July 2022. The second key change is the town has begun to explore development of 35 Old Perth Road, either as a standalone site or with the adjacent sites as an immediate priority. So this presents a opportunity to deliver on the key objectives of the Town Centre Master Plan by really trying to catalyse development in the town centre. Obviously we've got the pub being renovated and we've got the new Aegis site happening down the street, but really council leading by example in terms of town centre development. Council's being asked to endorse the project plan summary for the relocation of the administration and also approve for inclusion in the 22-23 proposed annual budget the release of the sum of $220,000 from the future projects reserved to allow project implementation. Should the proposal be endorsed, a comprehensive communication plan will be developed not only for the community but also for staff and a change management plan as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, question, Councillor Carter.
For a start, I don't have the confidential document, so I'm not sure what was in that. But I have 2 questions. What's the size of the land at 35 Old Perth Road?
Ask Mr Gibson.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I believe it's 473 square metres, but I'll check.
Could you say that again?
473.
Sorry, was that 473 or 453?
70, but he's checking.
Okay.
473 square metres.
Okay. So My question, following up on that one, is that it's a very, very small lot with only one frontage, isn't it? The Old Perth Road frontage. So, if you were going to make housing out of this, would you not need the neighbours involved, or can we develop that on our own? Wouldn't that be risky for the council to develop that land?
Through you, Madam Mayor, we could develop it independently. There would be genuine advantages in developing with the abutting neighbours, no doubt. And there have been discussions with those abutting neighbours to gauge their enthusiasm in a potential sort of joint venture, and that so far that has been reasonably promising, albeit relatively informal. But if push came to shove, the town would be able to pursue a development of this site in isolation. Whether that would be risky, I suppose any development comes with risk, and I suppose council would need to be cognizant of the risk in developing and in terms of investing further in the site. That would need, if we came to that point, that would need to be based on a business plan or similar. But I would also say that no development occurs without any risk, and this, as much as anything else, would come with its own risk.
And I'm assuming some upfront sort of funding would have to be provided before you could develop it, or?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, and that's quite typical. You need to, like any, take the Bassendean Hotel for example, they have to engage heritage consultants and architects and drainage engineers and acoustic engineers to prepare plans to actually get them to a point where they could lodge an application for development approval without any guarantee that it would actually be granted. So yes, the short answer would be that the redevelopment of that site or any other site would come with some upfront costs.
So that, sorry, I've got a series of questions. So that would lead into the fact that it would be more advisable to have solid agreements with for a joint venture rather than a single go it alone for the council, with the town.
I think that's certainly an option. So one option would be, and whilst that's not the decision before council at the moment, certainly in terms of the potential for that site, it could be the option of a joint venture where the town could go to market for an EOI to try and attract a joint venture partner to develop the site.
Okay.
Now we've come up with some concept designs in conjunction with those adjacent owners, just in terms of visualising what the potential is.
So, okay, the other question I wanted to ask, do we know what the effect of the proposed move, the disruption on the library services would be? Because I haven't seen any plans and so I don't know.
Certainly. So what we've done is we've come up with a project plan, and as outlined in the on page 67, the plan is that we go through a series of phases. So phase 1 is preparation and planning, and then the first team to relocate is the Director of Community Planning going out to Ashfield, because that will vacate first. So that's the idea, and then the relocation of finance and records to 48 Old Perth Road, and then the relocation of customer services to the library in November 2022 to May 2023. Any change, there'll be some disruption, but the idea of coming up with a change management plan for all staff so that they're aware, but we actually think the end result will be worth, you know, the any disruption that occurs. There'll also be a communications plan to ensure that the community is aware, but again, we hope the end result will actually benefit the community in that they have a one-stop shop to receive services in terms of customer services, and we're only talking about 5 part-time staff, which usually equate to about 3 working at any time going into the library, so it's not a huge impost on the library.
So Councillor Carter, would you like Is this a series of questions, or would you like to allow others to
Oh,
ask?
certainly if others come in, but there was just following that train of
Okay, I'll let
thought,
you ask.
Just
yep,
one more.
yep, yep.
Okay. Now I've lost my train of thought.
Sorry, I apologise. I should have
That's okay.
interrupted.
Oh, yeah, the idea of co-locating customer service and library service is not unknown, and it's done quite frequently. And there's probably nothing in there. It's the how it affects the operations of the library and the staff, and how it affects the. Is there staff going to be less, or are you looking to?
No. So this exercise is just about co-location. It's just about the physical relocation of staff into a new work environment. So we hope the end result is actually better for staff and better for our customers, and it will be managed very carefully with a change management process. So we will be consulting with staff and also getting them involved in the design of their new workspace as well, getting their input and feedback. And we hope that it will lead to a more seamless service provision in terms of the community, but also provide better coverage for us too, during staff absences and leave and so on. So there are opportunities down the track, I think, to start looking at work design and so on to harness the opportunity. But at this stage, all this is about is the relocation of staff moving from one building to another and implementing some minor works to accommodate those changes.
I have other questions, but I'll leave it to the
So,
fellow councillors.
before I go to my questions, other councillors first. Councillor Ames.
Mine's in reference to the confidential document, so it'll be obviously
Okay, we can go
opportunity for us
behind
to go
closed doors.
at some stage, so that's my question, yeah.
Councillor Plifka.
Yeah, mine's
Okay.
open, so that's not an issue. For Director Gibson, so we'll make a few assumptions. So we've either got the funding or we've found a suitable joint venturer. How long from when council makes a resolution to embark on a odyssey of property development is it until we get to being shovel ready?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that's a good question. If you look at the time frames attached to the statutory processes, you've got 3 months, 2 or 3 months for the determination of the application for development approval. You've obviously got the preparatory phase of putting together that application. There would be the need for detailed engineering drawings to satisfy the requirements for a building permit. There'd also be the requirement for a demolition permit to remove what's currently there. Before you actually have the plans in hand to lodge your application for development approval, they need to be prepared. So there needs to be an architect or similar to prepare those plans. To actually have that architect on board, there needs to be a procurement process under the council's purchasing policy. So there's
Feasibility study?
Business case. So it could be many months. It could be a full year.
Wouldn't be inconceivable that it could potentially be 2 years?
Potentially, depending on the processes didn't run neatly in a linear fashion. If there was a delay in one aspect of it, it would have subsequent delays for later steps. 2 years would seem a long time, but not inconceivable. But similarly, it's a relatively modest sized site, as was identified earlier. And if we were doing it ourselves without a separate joint venture partner, it would be reasonably simple. Because there's only so many ways it could be developed, and you could try and compress the time frames accordingly. But ultimately, it's just a shot in the dark. It could be a year, or, as you say, it could potentially be longer.
Thanks.
So could I follow on with a question there? Given the market at the moment and the instability in the building industry, particularly with multiple large companies folding, and you've mentioned a joint venture with obviously a company that have expertise in construction. Would it not be more advisable, given the timeline that might be drawn out, anything from 3 months to 1 year to 2 years, would it not be advisable to have those business cases and joint ventures and what have you all organised before you do a relocation, given that the relocation timeline, from what I've heard during Ms Mabb's presentation, is approximately 6 months? I'm interested. Okay, so a year.
Yep, sure.
So I'm just interested in the correlation of these timelines and trying to pick up on, what goes first, the horse or the cart?
Through Madam Mayor, no, I wouldn't agree. To do anything at 35 Old Perth Road, the town needs to vacate it. So whether it's now or whether it's later, for us to transact on it, for us to lease it out, for us to demolish and rebuild, for us to do anything that isn't occupying it for civic functions, we need to empty it out. In terms of, I suppose, a positive movement for the town centre and sending the right messaging about where the town council sits on town centre development and how genuine it is about the adopted master plan, the adopted land asset strategy, the soon-to-be advertised local planning strategy, and the soon-to-be advertised local planning scheme, it would be a great thing to actually signal to the community and businesses alike that the town and council are making genuine changes to the town centre.
I do have other questions, but I would like to hear from other councillors first with your questions. So, Councillor Carter, you can continue if you
I would like to go behind closed doors because there's some. I want some sort of. I don't want to. I'd like to go behind closed doors.
So, we have 2 other very small items. We could attend to those first and then go behind closed doors with your indulgence, councillors. So we've got item 8.11, which is Audit and Governance Committee meeting. Do we have any questions on that one? No? And then we've got item 8.12, which is the end of year closure. Do we have any questions on that one? Okay, and the notice of motion is self-explanatory. I don't think there's any questions on that. So with that, can I have a mover to go behind close? And I'll wait for a minute to allow the recording. Behind closed doors. Yes.